The golden hour light painted Maple Street in warm amber tones, but beneath that peaceful veneer, something sinister was brewing. Clint Eastwood walked slowly down the sidewalk, his weathered hands tucked deep in his jacket pockets, feeling the familiar weight of years pressing against his shoulders. At 73, his stride wasn't what it once was, but his eyes remained as sharp as a hawk's, scanning everything with practiced awareness. Children's laughter echoed from the small park at the end of the block, their voices mixing with the distant chatter of parents enjoying the mild evening. Dogs barked playfully behind white picket fences, and the smell of barbecue drifted from backyard where families gathered around dinner tables. This was suburbia at its finest, the American dream painted in manicured lawns and flower beds. Yet something felt wrong. Clint couldn't shake the feeling that had been gnawing at him since he turned onto the street 20 minutes ago. It was too quiet, even for a Tuesday evening. The kind of quiet that came before storms, when animals sensed danger and went into hiding. He paused near a weathered park bench, lowering himself onto its wooden slats with a soft grunt. From here, he had a clear view of the playground where a handful of children still played, their parents watching with that particular brand of suburban vigilance, aware but relaxed, protective but not paranoid. That's when he noticed a pattern. One by one, parents were gathering their children with unusual urgency. A woman who had been laughing into her phone suddenly stood, her expression tight with worry as she pulled her daughter away from the swings. Another family packed up their picnic with quick, nervous movements, their eyes darting towards something Clint couldn't yet see. The exodus was subtle but unmistakable. Within minutes, the playground that had been filled with life became eerily empty. Windows began closing along the street. Porch lights flickered off. The neighborhood was battening down like a ship preparing for a hurricane. Clint's instincts, honed by decades of life's harsh lessons, began to sharpen. He'd seen this before, the way fear moved through communities like poison in the water supply. It started with whispers, grew into avoidance, and eventually transformed entire neighborhoods into ghost towns where good people lived as prisoners in their own homes. Movement caught his eye at the far end of the street. 3 figures stood under the flickering street lamp, their silhouettes dark against the gathering dusk. Even from a distance, Clint could read their body language, the casual stance of predators who knew they owned their territory. One flicked a cigarette, its orange ember glowing briefly before he let it fall to the pavement. Another cracked his knuckles loudly enough that the sound carried across the empty space. The third man, slightly apart from the others, kept his hands in his jacket pockets, but his shoulders were squared in a way that suggested readiness for violence. They weren't just loitering. They were hunting. Clint's jaw tightened as he watched them skin the street with proprietorial confidence. These weren't lost travelers or delivery men. These were wolves who had found a flock without a shepherd, and they intended to feast. The sound of wheels on pavement drew his attention. A young girl, perhaps 11 or 12, was rolling down the sidewalk in a wheelchair. Her movements were steady and purposeful, as if this evening routine was as normal as breathing. What struck Clint wasn't just a presence, it was a complete lack of fear. While every other person had fled indoors, this child continued her journey as if the gathering darkness held no threat. She was African American, wearing a simple yellow dress that seemed to glow in the fading light. Her chair was well-maintained but clearly well-used, suggesting a family that took care of what they had. As she drew closer, Clint could see her face more clearly, intelligent eyes set in features that held a maturity no child should possess. The 3 men had noticed her too. Clint watched as they straightened, their casual postures shifting into something more predatory. The cigarette smoker said something to his companions that made them chuckle, a sound that carried menace even across the distance. Clint stood slowly, his joints protesting briefly before settling into familiar readiness. He'd spent a lifetime learning to read situations, and this one was writing itself in letters of fire across the evening sky. The girl was heading directly toward trouble, and she either didn't know it or didn't care. As she rolled past his bench, Clint called out softly, "Evening, miss." She turned her head, studying him with eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "Evening, sir," she replied, her voice clear and unafraid. "Might want to head home," Clint suggested, nodding toward the 3 men. "Looks like there's weather coming." The girl followed his gaze, and for a moment, something flickered across her face. Not fear, but recognition. "They don't scare me anymore," she said simply. "Maybe they should." She shook her head, gripping the wheels of her chair tighter. I'm tired of being scared. Tired of hiding. Her voice carried a steel that reminded Clint of soldiers he'd known, people who had decided that some things were worth facing, regardless of the cost. The men were moving now, walking with deliberate slowness toward them. Their intentions were written in every step, every gesture. This wasn't going to end with words. Clint exhaled slowly, feeling his body settle into patterns learned long ago. Some fights chose you, whether you wanted them or not. Tonight was going to be one of those nights. The three men approached with the swagger of wolves who had never encountered a shepherd. Clint remained seated on the bench, his posture relaxed but ready, while the girl in the wheelchair sat perfectly still beside him. The evening air grew thick with tension, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. The leader was tall and lean, with greasy hair and a cigarette dangling from his lips like a permanent fixture. His clothes were rumpled and stained, suggesting a man who had given up on impressing anyone through appearance and relied instead on intimidation. The second man was shorter but broader, his thick arms covered in faded tattoos that spoke of prison yards and hard living. The third hung back slightly, his nervous energy evident in the way he kept glancing around, as if expecting police cars to materialize from the shadows. Well, the leader drawled, stopping about 10 feet away. His voice carried the artificial confidence of someone who had learned to mistake cruelty for strength. What do we have here? An old man and his little pet. The girl's hands tightened on her wheelchair's armrests, but she didn't respond. Clint appreciated that. Smart enough to stay quiet, brave enough to stay present. Clint looked up slowly, his weathered face impassive. Just enjoying the evening air, boys. Nothing to concern yourselves with. The tattooed man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the empty houses. Hear that, Tommy? The old-timer thinks we're concerned about him. Tommy, the leader, took a long drag from his cigarette and exhaled the smoke in Clint's direction. See, here's the thing. Grandpa, this is our street. Has been for months now, and we don't much care for visitors. Your street? Clint's eyebrows raised slightly. Funny, I didn't see your name on any of the mailboxes. The third man, younger and more agitated than the others, stepped forward. You got a smart mouth, old man. Maybe we need to teach you some respect. Clint's gaze shifted to him, taking in the telltale signs, dilated pupils, jittery movements, the particular kind of bravado that came from chemical courage. Drugs made men unpredictable, but they also made them sloppy. Respect, Clint repeated thoughtfully. That's interesting. See, where I come from, respect is earned, not taken. Tommy flicked his cigarette toward the girl, the burning ember landing near her wheelchair. Maybe we start with teaching the little cripple here what happens when she doesn't stay where she belongs. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Clint felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. He'd heard enough. Some lines, once crossed, changed everything. Son, Clint said, his voice dropping to a register that carried decades of authority, you just made your first mistake. Yeah. Tommy sneered. What's that? Thinking this was going to end with just words. The tattooed man cracked his knuckles again, grinning. 3 against 1, Grandpa. Plus, she ain't going anywhere fast. He gestured crudely toward the girl's wheelchair. Clint stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. As he rose to his full height, something shifted in the atmosphere. The casual confidence the 3 men had worn like armor began to show cracks. There was something in Clint's posture, in the way he held himself, that spoke of violence professionally applied. Her name, Clint said quietly, is not something you get to use. The girl spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. It's Maya, she said, her voice steady. My name is Maya, and I live here. This is my street, too. Tommy laughed, but the sound was forced now. Mouthy little thing, ain't she? Maybe we need to teach them both. He didn't finish the sentence. Clint moved with surprising speed for a man his age, closing the distance between them in 2 quick steps. His fist connected with Tommy's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and dropping him to his knees. The tattooed man reacted first, swinging a wild haymaker that Clint ducked effortlessly. In the same motion, Clint grabbed the man's extended arm and used his momentum against him, sending him sprawling onto the sidewalk with a technique learned in places where second chances didn't exist. The third man, the young, jittery one, fumbled in his jacket pocket, producing a small canister. Pepper spray. His hand shook as he raised it, fear and chemical courage warring in his expression. "Easy now," Clint said, his voice calm despite the violence that had just erupted. "You don't want to do that." "The hell I don't." The young man's voice cracked as he pressed the trigger. Clint was already moving, turning his body and raising his arm to shield his face. Most of the spray went wide, but enough caught him to make his eyes water and his throat burn. It had been decades since he dealt with chemical weapons, but muscle memory kicked in. Pain was temporary. Losing was forever. Through watering eyes, Clint saw Tommy struggling to his feet, gasping for breath. The tattooed man was rolling on the ground, clutching his shoulder where he'd landed hard on the pavement. The young man stood frozen, apparently shocked that his weapon hadn't ended the fight instantly. Maya sat perfectly still in her wheelchair, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. She hadn't screamed, hadn't called for help, hadn't tried to flee. She was bearing witness, and somehow that felt important. "That all you got?" Clint asked, wiping his streaming eyes with the back of his hand. His voice was rough from the pepper spray, but unbroken. The three men looked at each other, their earlier confidence shattered. They had expected an easy victim, an old man who would cower and plead. Instead, they found something they weren't prepared for, someone who fought back. Tommy spat blood onto the sidewalk, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "This ain't over, old man. Not by a long shot." Clint's smile held no warmth whatsoever. "Son, it hasn't even started." The standoff stretched across the empty street like a taut wire ready to snap. Tommy wiped blood from his lip, his eyes burning with the kind of hatred that comes from unexpected humiliation. The tattooed man pushed himself to his feet, favoring his injured shoulder, while the young one still clutched the pepper spray canister with shaking hands. Maya remained perfectly still, but Clint could sense her attention shifting between the three men and something else, movement behind the curtains of nearby houses. The neighbors were watching, safe behind their windows, but watching nonetheless. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Tommy snarled, straightening his rumpled shirt with exaggerated care. "We own this neighborhood. Been coming here every night for months, and not one person has said a word to us. Not one." "Maybe they were waiting for someone who wasn't afraid," Clint replied evenly. The tattooed man flexed his fingers, testing his shoulder. "Afraid? Old man, you just signed your death warrant. And hers too." He nodded toward Maya with undisguised menace. That was the moment everything changed. Clint had been willing to walk away after the first exchange. Young men often talked bigger than they were, and sometimes a quick lesson in consequences was enough to send them looking for easier prey. But threatening the girl crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "What did you just say?" Clint's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than any shout. The young man with the pepper spray took a nervous step backward. "Tommy, maybe we should." "Shut up, Mickey," Tommy snapped. Then, turning back to Clint with renewed venom, "You heard me. The old cripple there thinks she can just roll around here like she owns a place. Time someone taught her different." Maya spoke quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "I do own a place here. My family's lived on this street for 8 years. How long have you lived here?" The simplicity of the question hung in the air, exposing the fundamental absurdity of their claims. These men were invaders, parasites feeding on fear, and Maya had just stripped away their pretense of legitimacy. Tommy's face flushed red. "Smart mouth on this one. Mickey, give me that spray." The young man hesitated, glancing between Tommy and Clint with growing unease. "I don't know, man. Maybe we should just—" "Give me the damn spray." Mickey reluctantly handed over the canister, and Tommy immediately raised it toward Maya. "Let's see how smart you are with this in your face, little girl." Clint moved before Tommy's finger reached the trigger. Not toward Tommy, but toward Maya, placing himself directly between the wheelchair and the pepper spray. The position left him vulnerable to the other two men, but some calculations went beyond tactical advantage. "You want to spray someone," Clint said quietly. "Spray me." Tommy's hand wavered slightly. "Up close, Looking into Clint's eyes, he was beginning to understand that he'd misjudged his opponent. This wasn't just some random old man. This was someone who had faced down real danger before, someone who understood violence not as a tool of bullying but as a last resort between civilization and chaos. "Don't tempt me," Tommy muttered, but the canister remained pointed at Clint rather than Maya. "I'm not tempting you," Clint replied. "I'm giving you a choice. Walk away now, and this ends here. Keep pushing, and you'll find out what happens when you threaten children in front of someone who gives a damn." The tattooed man circled around behind Clint, trying to flank him. Big talk for someone about to get his ass kicked by three guys half his age. Clint didn't turn around. Age and treachery beat youth and inexperience every time. "Son, but you're about to learn that the hard way." Mickey was backing away now, his earlier bravado evaporating as he realized the situation was spiraling beyond his comfort zone. "Guys, maybe we should just go. The old man's not worth it." "Like hell," Tommy snarled. "Nobody disrespects us like this. Nobody." He squeezed the trigger. The pepper spray shot out in a concentrated stream, but Clint was already moving. He twisted left, letting most of the spray pass by him, then stepped forward into Tommy's guard. His elbow connected with Tommy's nose, producing a wet cracking sound and a spray of blood. The tattooed man lunged from behind, but Clint had been tracking his movement by sound. He ducked low and drove backward with his elbow, catching the man in the ribs hard enough to fold him over. A quick pivot, and Clint's knee met the descending face with surgical precision. Mickey stood frozen, staring at his two companions writhing on the ground. When Clint turned toward him, the young man dropped the second pepper spray canister he'd been reaching for and raised his hands. "I'm done," Mickey said quickly. "I'm out of here." "Smart choice," Clint acknowledged, then looked down at Tommy, who was trying to stem the flow of blood from his broken nose. "You boys had enough education for one evening." Tommy glared up at him with undimmed hatred. "This isn't over." Clint crouched down, bringing his face level with Tommy's. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Son, if I see you on this street again, if I hear you've been bothering this girl or anyone else in this neighborhood, what happened here tonight will seem like a gentle warning. Are we clear?" For a moment, Tommy's defiance wavered. Then he spat blood and nodded reluctantly. "Good. Now get your friends and get gone." As the three men limped away, supporting each other and muttering curses, Maya finally spoke. "They'll be back," she said simply. "Men like that always come back." Clint looked down at her, seeing something in her expression that went beyond her years. "How long have they been bothering you?" 3 months. Started with just words, calling me names, then pushing my chair, making me drop things. Tonight was the first time with the spray." She paused, watching the men disappear around the corner. But it wasn't going to be the last. Clint nodded slowly. He'd seen enough predators to know their patterns. They always escalated, always pushed boundaries until someone pushed back harder. "What's your name?" Maya asked. "Clint." "Thank you, Clint." She looked toward her house, where a porch light had just come on. "I should go in. My mom will be worried." As he began rolling toward her home, Clint called after her, "Maya." She stopped and looked back. "This isn't over," he said, echoing Tommy's earlier threat, but with entirely different meaning. "They'll come back with friends. More of them. Angrier." Maya nodded. "I know. Will you be here?" Clint looked around the quiet street, at the houses where families sat safe behind locked doors, at the place where 3 predators had just learned that their reign of fear had limits. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'll be here." The night settled over Maple Street like a shroud, but the silence felt different now. Not the oppressive quiet of fear, but the tense stillness that comes before a storm. Clint had positioned himself on Maya's front porch, her mother having insisted he stay for dinner after Maya recounted the evening's events. Mrs. Johnson was a nurse who worked double shift to support her daughter, and the gratitude in her eyes when she looked at Clint spoke volumes about the helplessness she'd been living with. "They come by here almost every night," she'd explain over hastily prepared sandwiches. "Maya tries to act tough, but I see how it affects her. She stopped going to the park, stopped visiting friends. Tonight was the first time in weeks she'd been outside after dark." Now, as Clint sat in the porch swing, Maya was at the window behind him, supposedly doing homework but actually keeping watch. Mrs. Johnson had gone to bed an hour ago, exhausted from her shift, but Clint knew she wasn't sleeping. Fear had a way of keeping parents awake. The street appeared deserted, but Clint's experienced eye caught signs that others missed. Curtains twitching at windows, the occasional shadow moving behind blinds. The entire neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting to see what the night would bring. At 11:47 p.m., they came. 2 cars this time, rolling slowly down the street with their headlights dimmed. They parked 3 houses down, far enough away to avoid streetlights, but close enough to make their intentions clear. Clint counted at least 6 men emerging from the vehicles, possibly more. Tommy's bloody nose had apparently been persuasive when calling for reinforcements. "Maya," Clint said quietly, not turning around. "I see them," she replied from the window. "Go wake your mother. Tell her to call 911. Then both of you get into the back bedroom and stay there." "What about you?" Clint stood slowly, his joint protesting but his resolve firm. "I'm going to have a conversation with our visitors. There's too many of them. Numbers don't always matter. Honey, sometimes it's about who wants it more." As Clint stepped off the porch, he could hear Maya's wheelchair moving quickly down the hallway, her voice urgent but controlled as she woke her mother. Good girl. Smart girl. She understood when to fight and when to seek safety. The 6 men had formed a loose semicircle in the street, their body language radiating confidence and aggression. Tommy stood in the center, a white bandage across his broken nose making him look like a wounded predator. The others were clearly recruited muscle, bigger, younger, and hungrier for violence in the original trio. "Told you this wasn't over," Tommy called out as Clint approached. His voice was nasal now, distorted by swelling, but full of anticipated revenge. "So you brought friends," Clint observed calmly. "Smart thinking. Takes at least 6 of you to handle one old man, apparently." One of the new arrivals, a massive man with prison tattoos covering his neck, stepped forward. "You the one who messed with my cousin here." Clint glanced at Tommy. "Your cousin has poor social skills. I was helping him improve them." The big man cracked his knuckles, the sound like breaking kindling. "Well, now it's time for your education, old-timer." "Before we start the lesson," Clint said, pulling something from his jacket pocket, "I should mention I called some friends of my own." He held up his cell phone, which showed an active call to 911. The operator's tinny voice could be heard asking about his emergency. "Police are on their way," Clint continued conversationally. "Should be here in about 4 minutes. So whatever you boys are planning, you'd better make it quick." Tommy's face darkened. "Bluffing. You wouldn't have had time. Maya called them while you were getting your crew together. Smart girl. Unlike her, I've got nothing to lose by being here when they arrive." The big man hesitated, glancing at Tommy uncertainly. This wasn't how they planned it. A quick beating under cover of darkness, then disappearing before anyone could respond. Police involvement changed everything. But Tommy was beyond rational calculation. The humiliation of his broken nose, combined with the shame of running from an old man, had pushed him past the point of caring about consequences. "I don't care if the whole damn police force is coming," he snarled. "I'm going to make you pay for what you did." He pulled a knife from his belt, the blade glinting in the streetlight. The other men tensed, recognizing the escalation but unwilling to back down in front of their peers. Clint sighed. "Son, you're about to make the biggest mistake of your life." "Yeah? What's that?" "Thinking that knife makes you dangerous." Tommy lunged forward, the blade aimed at Clint's midsection. But Clint had been reading his body language for the past 30 seconds, seeing the attack coming before Tommy consciously decided to make it. He sidestepped smoothly, grabbed Tommy's wrist, and used the young man's momentum to drive him face first into the pavement. The knife clattered away across the asphalt. The big man roared and charged, but Clint was already moving. He picked up a fallen tree branch, thick as a baseball bat and just as effective, and swung it with precision born of desperation and experience. It connected with the big man's knee, producing a wet-popping sound and a scream of pain. The remaining 4 men hesitated, suddenly realizing that their easy victim was anything but. In that moment of uncertainty, sirens began wailing in the distance, growing louder by the second. Decision time. "Boys," Clint called out, breathing hard but still standing. "Police will be here in 90 seconds. You can explain to them why you brought knives to threaten an old man and a disabled girl, or you can disappear." The sound of approaching sirens made the choice for them. One by one, they began backing toward their cars, helping their injured companions and shooting murderous looks at Clint. Tommy, his face blooded from his impact with the pavement, pointed at Clint with shaking fury. "This isn't over. You can't watch her every night. We'll get her when you're not around." That was his final mistake. Clint walked over to where Tommy lay bleeding and crouched down beside him. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had faced death and learned not to fear it. "Listen very carefully," Clint said. "If anything happens to that girl, anything at all, I will find you. I will find every one of your friends, your family, everyone you've ever cared about. And what I do to you will make tonight look like a friendly handshake. Are we clear?" Tommy stared into Clint's eyes and saw something that made his blood freeze. This wasn't just an angry old man. This was someone who had killed before, someone who would kill again if necessary. He nodded mutely. "Good. Now get out of my sight." As the police cars turned onto Maple Street, their red and blue lights painting the houses in patriotic colors, the two cars full of would-be attackers disappeared into the night. Tommy limped to the passenger seat of the second vehicle, supported by his companions, his dreams of revenge temporarily put on hold. But Clint knew better than to think it was over. Men like Tommy didn't learn from defeat. They just got more careful about planning their next attack. 3 days had passed since the confrontation, and Maple Street was slowly returning to something resembling normal life. Children played in the park again, though they stayed closer to their parents. Neighbors ventured out to check their mail without first scanning the street for threats. The police had increased their patrols, but everyone knew that official protection could only do so much. Clint had taken up temporary residence in Maya's guest room, much to Mrs. Johnson's relief and Maya's delight. The girl had developed a hero worship that both amused and worried him. She was smart enough to learn from his example, but he hoped she wouldn't need to use those lessons. On Thursday morning, as Clint sat on the front porch reading the newspaper, a familiar figure appeared at the end of the block. Tommy walked alone this time, his swagger replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. His face was still swollen, and he moved carefully, as if every step caused pain. Clint set down his paper and waited. Tommy stopped at the edge of the yard, maintaining a respectful distance. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Tommy cleared his throat. "I wanted to say something," he began, his voice rough and uncertain. "I'm listening." Tommy looked down at his feet, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "I've been thinking about what you said, about respect being owned, not taken." Clint waited. "My whole life, I thought the only way to get respect was to make people afraid of you. Thought if you were bigger, meaner, tougher than everyone else, that made you somebody." Tommy finally looked up, meeting Clint's eyes. "But you're not big. You're not mean. And you still made me feel like a fool." "Respect isn't about making people afraid," Clint said quietly. "It's about making them feel safe." Tommy nodded slowly, as if this concept was still foreign to him. "The girl, Maya, she never did nothing to us. Never hurt nobody. We picked on her because we could. And now I see how wrong that was." Tommy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "My little sister's got cerebral palsy. She's in a wheelchair, too. If someone did to her what I did to Maya..." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Clint studied the young man's face, looking for signs of deception but finding only genuine remorse. "What are you asking me, son?" "I want to make it right. Don't know how, but I want to try." Before Clint could respond, the front door opened and Maya emerged, maneuvering her wheelchair onto the porch with practiced ease. She looked at Tommy without fear, taking in his battered appearance and defeated posture. "You're the one who pepper-sprayed me," she said simply. Tommy flinched as if she'd slapped him. "Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm really, really sorry." Maya considered this for a moment. "Why?" Because you didn't deserve it. Because I was wrong. Because I was scared and angry and I took it out on someone who never hurt me." The words tumbled out of him in a rush, as if he'd been rehearsing them for days. Scared of what? Tommy's face crumpled slightly. Everything. Being nobody. Being poor. Being looked down on. I thought if I could make other people feel small, it would make me feel big. Maya nodded slowly. Did it work? No, Tommy admitted. It just made me feel worse. The three of them sat in silence for a while, processing the weight of the conversation. Finally, Maya spoke again. My mom's making lunch. You want to stay? Tommy's eyes widened in surprise. You'd want me to. I want to understand you, Maya said. I want to know why you and your friends thought it was okay to hurt people. And I want to know if you really mean what you're saying. Tommy looked at Clint, who simply shrugged. It's a choice, not mine. I'd like that, Tommy said quietly, if you're sure. As Maya went inside to tell her mother about the unexpected guest, Clint and Tommy remained on the porch. The older man studied the younger one, seeing something he recognized from his own youth, a person at a crossroads, faced with a choice between becoming better or becoming worse. You understand this doesn't fix everything, Clint said. You've got friends who aren't ready to change. They are going to see this as betrayal. Tommy nodded grimly. I know. Already got threats. But I can't keep living like I was. It was eating me up inside. Change is hard. People will test you. They'll try to pull you back to who you used to be. What do I do when that happens? Clint smiled slightly. Same thing you did today. You choose to be better. Mrs. Johnson appeared at the door, having been briefed by Maya about their unexpected guest. Her expression was guarded but not hostile. Maya says you're staying for lunch. If that's okay. I understand if you'd rather I didn't. She studied him for a long moment, taking in his injuries and defeated posture. Can you set a table? Tommy blinked in surprise. Yes. Then you can earn your meal. Kitchen's through there. As Tommy disappeared inside, Mrs. Johnson moved closer to Clint. You think he means it? I think he wants to mean it. Whether he can follow through, that's up to him. Over lunch, an extraordinary conversation unfolded. Tommy talked about his childhood, raised by a grandmother who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. About dropping out of school, running with gangs, spending time in juvenile detention. About learning that the world was divided into predators and prey, and deciding which side he wanted to be on. Maya listened without judgment, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things. Why did hurting others make him feel better? When did he first realize he was becoming someone he didn't like? What did he want to be instead? By the time dessert was served, something had shifted. Not forgiveness, that would take time and proof of change, but understanding. The recognition that people were complicated, that circumstances shaped choices, and that redemption was possible for those willing to fight for it. As Tommy prepared to leave, he turned to Maya one last time. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that what happened between us changed me, made me see things different. Actions matter more than words, Maya replied. Show me who you want to be. Tommy nodded and walked away, his back straighter than when he'd arrived. That evening, as Clint prepared to pack his things, his work on Maple Street was done, Maya asked him one final question. Do you think he'll really change? Clint considered this carefully. I think he has a chance. Whether he takes it or not, that's not up to us. What if his friends come back without him? Clint smiled, gesturing toward the windows where neighbors could be seen moving freely about their evening routines. Look around. Maya, the street isn't the same place it was a week ago. People aren't hiding anymore. They're not afraid. That changes everything. As if to prove his point, Mr. Peterson from across the street waved from his porch, where he sat reading the evening paper instead of cowering behind drawn curtains. Fear is like a disease, Clint continued. It spreads from person to person until whole communities are infected. But courage works the same way. One person stands up, then another. Pretty soon, the bullies find themselves outnumbered. Maya nodded thoughtfully. Will you come back and visit? Clint packed his few belongings into a worn duffel bag, each item carefully placed with the methodical precision of someone who had lived out of suitcases for most of his adult life. His movements were slower this morning, not from age but from reluctance. Leaving had always been easy before. Finish the job, hit the road, never look back. But something about this place, about Maya and her quiet strength, had gotten under his skin. "Don't know," he said honestly, folding his spare shirt. "I'm not much good at staying in one place." Maya watched from the doorway, her expression thoughtful. "Mom says you saved our lives." "Your mom's being dramatic. You were handling things just fine before I showed up." "No, I wasn't." Maya's voice was quiet but firm. "I was surviving. That's different than living." Clint paused in his packing, struck by the wisdom in her words. At 11 years old, she understood distinctions that some adults never grasped. Mrs. Johnson appeared behind Maya, carrying a paper bag that smelled like fresh-baked cookies. "For the road," she explained, though her voice carried an unspoken question. Did he really have to go? "Much obliged," Clint said, accepting the bag. Through the window, he could see neighbors moving about their morning routines with a normalcy that had been absent just days ago. Children walked to the school bus stop without hurried glances over their shoulders. Adults chatted across property lines instead of scurrying between safe spaces. The transformation was remarkable, but Clint knew it was fragile. Fear could return as quickly as it had departed if people forgot the lessons of the past week. "There's something you both need to understand," he said, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "What happened here, standing up to those men, that was just the beginning. Real change takes time. There will be other bullies, other challenges. The question is, what are you going to do when I'm not here to help?" Maya rolled her wheelchair closer, her dark eyes serious. "We're going to remember what you taught us." "And what's that?" "That courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are scared." Clint smiled despite himself. "Smart girl, but knowing something and doing it are different things." Mrs. Johnson moved to stand beside her daughter, placing a protective hand on Maya's shoulder. "We won't forget," she said simply, "and we won't let this neighborhood forget either." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Mrs. Johnson went to answer it, returning moments later with Mr. Peterson from across the street. He was a thin man in his 50s, wearing paint-stained overalls and carrying what looked like a hand-carved wooden plaque. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, nodding nervously to Clint. "I wanted to give you something before you left." He held out the plaque, carved into the wood in simple block letters with the words, "Maple Street, where neighbors look out for each other." Below that, in smaller script, dedicated to those who stand up when others can't. "Made it in my workshop," Peterson explained, his cheeks reddening slightly. "Figured we needed something to remind folks of what happened here, what you did for us." Clint turned the plaque over in his hands, feeling the smooth wood and careful craftsmanship. "This is beautiful work, but I can't." "It's not for you to keep," Peterson interrupted gently. "It's for the neighborhood. We're going to mount it at the entrance to the street, but we wanted you to be the first to see it." More neighbors had gathered on the front porch while they talked. The Martinez family from next door, the elderly Kowalskis from the corner house, even the teenage Thompson boy who usually avoided adults entirely. They stood quietly, respectfully, but their presence spoke volumes. Maya looked up at Clint. "You see? You didn't just save me. You saved all of us." Clint felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with belonging. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to stay, to become part of this community he had helped heal, to have a place where people knew his name and expected him to show up. But the moment passed. He had never been good at staying, at putting down roots. Movement was his nature, drifting from place to place like smoke on the wind. "I appreciate this more than you know," he said, handing the plaque back to Peterson. "But Maya's right. You don't need me anymore. You've got each other." As if to prove his point, Tommy appeared at the edge of the gathered crowd. He looked different, cleaner, more purposeful. The swagger was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "Mr. Clint." Tommy's voice was uncertain. Could I talk to you for a minute?" The neighbors parted to let him through, their expressions wary but not hostile. Word had apparently spread about Tommy's visit the day before, his apparent change of heart. "What's on your mind, son?" Tommy glanced around at the assembled neighbors, then back at Clint. "I wanted to tell everyone what I told you yesterday. That I was wrong. that what me and my friends did here was... He struggled for words. It was evil, and I'm sorry. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. These people had been terrorized by Tommy and his crew for months. Forgiveness wouldn't come quickly or easily. Finally, Mrs. Johnson spoke. Sorry is a start, but what are you going to do to make it right? Tommy straightened his shoulders. I'm going back to school, getting my GED, and... He looked directly at Maya. I want to volunteer at the community center, helping kids with disabilities. If you think that would be okay. Maya studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. Actions matter more than words. Show us who you want to be. As the crowd began to disperse, each neighbor stopping to shake Clint's hand offer quiet words of thanks, the old man found himself alone with Maya and her mother once more. You sure about leaving? Mrs. Johnson asked. Clint shouldered his duffel bag and picked up the paper sack of cookies. There are other streets, other people who need help. That's just who I am. Maya rolled forward and took his weathered hand in her small one. Promise me something. What's that? Honey. Promise me that when you find those other streets, those other people, you'll remember us. Remember that standing up for what's right makes a difference. Clint knelt down so they were eye level, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. I promise. And you promise me something too. What? Promise me you'll keep being brave. Keep speaking up. Keep showing people that strength doesn't come from hurting others. It comes from protecting them. Maya smiled, and in that expression, Clint saw the woman she would become. Strong, compassionate, unafraid. I promise. As Clint walked away from Maple Street for the last time, he could hear the sounds of normal life returning. Children laughing, dogs barking, neighbors calling out greetings to each other. Behind him, Peterson was already measuring the spot where the commemorative plaque would hang. At the corner, Clint turned back for one final look. Maya was on her front porch, watching him go. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he touched the brim of his hat in response. Then he rounded the corner and was gone, leaving behind a street that would never again mistake silence for peace or hiding for safety. The fear was dead, and in its place, something better had taken root, the understanding that ordinary people, when they stood together, were capable of extraordinary courage. Miles away, walking toward whatever challenge awaited him next, Clint smiled and took a bite of Mrs. Johnson's cookies. They tasted like home, something he'd almost forgotten he was still capable of recognizing. The road stretched ahead, empty and full of possibilities. Behind him, Maple Street lived on, forever changed by the night fear finally met its match in the heart of one old man who refused to walk away when others needed him most. In the months that followed, word of what happened on Maple Street would spread to other neighborhoods, inspiring other people to stand up to their own bullies and predators. Maya would grow up to become a civil rights lawyer, specializing in disability advocacy. Tommy would earn his GED, attend community college, and eventually open a non-profit organization helping at-risk youth find alternatives to gang life. But all of that was still to come. For now, it was enough that a quiet suburban street had learned the difference between peace and fear, between community and isolation, between the silence of terror and the stillness of safety. And somewhere out there on the open road, an old man with a duffel bag full of memories continued his journey, carrying with him the knowledge that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change a world. One street, one person, one moment of standing up when others are afraid to move at a time.